Thank you all for coming to my talk on NFTs as a new file format. My name is Roosevelt Stenson. I'm a developer from the Midwest, specifically Minnesota. Is anyone here from Minnesota? I'm curious. Hey. All right, right on. Yeah, MN Chads, rise up. Okay. So I'm going to go over just kind of a brief history of NFTs. They kind of exploded last year onto the kind of blockchain space. I'm sure we're all familiar with the Bored Apes, right? Bored Ape Yacht Club. There was also the CryptoPunks. Those were kind of big. And then probably my favorite NFTs, I think, Ether Rocks, right? I mean, absolutely fantastic. Now, my opinion on NFTs are that they're kind of the equivalent of a file on a computer, where the image for the file is essentially the art for the NFT. And when you click on the file and you want to open it or use it with an app, it says, which application would you like to use this NFT with, or the file with. And so that's my opinion on where NFTs are currently at. So if we go through the actual software logic of how the NFT minting logic works currently, there's typically a website. On that website, there is a mint button, and the mint button is directly connected to the Ethereum contract, and you mint an NFT. They're typically done for fundraising events or some sort of fundraising for a project. And that's basically where NFTs are at. Now, I've been working on something for really the past year, basically building out a prototype on something, basically a different way NFTs can be minted. And if we walk through this, so there's basically three big kind of markets that people are trying to apply NFTs to. The first one is music. Another one is video or streaming, and then the last one is gaming. Those are kind of the three big markets that I've seen in terms of how people are applying NFTs to existing markets. So through my application logic, those applications would basically run through a server, and then that would control the minting logic of the NFT. So there is no going to just a website and clicking a mint button, or going directly to the Ethereum contract and clicking the mint function. It's tied to application-specific logic at this point. I call this mechanized NFT minting because there is a mechanism that controls the minting logic. So the working prototype that I've built, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. I built this little web game, Chainlink the Journey, a couple years ago. Just like a hokey little web game. Basically, it's kind of like the Google Chrome dinosaur game, right, where the dinosaur jumps over cactuses, but you're playing as Sergei Nazarov, and you jump over a bunch of just fun objects. Eventually, you start to kind of bounce up, climb into space, fall back through the atmosphere. You help out an astronaut along the way. And at the end, you're able to mint an NFT. There is no way to mint this NFT without playing through this game. You cannot go to Ethereum to mint it. You have to go through the game to mint it. After someone mints it, they could list it on OpenSea if they wish, but basically it's forcing the NFT minting to go through application logic. And it works. So just kind of reiterating how this specific design works. There's a video game. The video game is connected to the server. The server controls the NFT minting logic, and the NFT then plugs back into the video game. In this case, basically functioning as a form of DLC. There's another chapter to the game that I've built that you can't access unless you have the NFT. So for gamers out there, right, DLC, downloadable content. Another thing that NFTs can be replaced, and this is something that the Chainlink team is talking about, is dynamic NFTs. I see them as basically replacing the trading card, right, like a baseball card. So this was one of my favorite baseball players, Joe Mauer. I'm from Minnesota. And if, in the future, I could see baseball cards basically becoming digital cards, which would be cool in a way, because there's things that you could do with a digital trading card that you can't do with a physical paper card. For instance, and this is an example that I'm going to talk about first because I know that I could actually build this one, because it has to do with esports. Esports are a pretty big market out there. The video games, people competing, and it's entirely digital, so it would be easy to build into a digital card. So in this case, there's Dendi from the team Navis Vincier, Navi for Dota 2. If he had a trading card or a dynamic NFT, it would be connected essentially to the server, and the server would then connect to the game logic, or the esport in this case. And again, this is something that the Chainlink team has been talking about a lot, but there are some gaps that have to be filled here. Okay, so that's just kind of like the gaming element of how NFTs can be applied to the gaming market. Another one is the video market. So just kind of going over a brief history of like video media formats, right? There was the VHS. I'm sure we all remember the VHS. There were CDs and DVDs, eventually the Blu-ray, and then we entered the streaming age. My opinion on the gap between the CD and the streaming age is there was a change in basically the feeling of ownership of owning a piece of media. So for instance, let's say that I want to purchase season 4 of Atlanta, and I want to own season 4 of Atlanta. But I don't want to have to remember if it's on Hulu or Amazon or HBO or whatever streaming platform that I purchased it on. I just want to own season 4 of Atlanta. And at this point, you're looking at me and you're like, that kind of doesn't make any sense. But if we walk through it in like the physical space, right? You're sitting on your couch, you want to watch a movie, you have a movie shelf with all your movies, right? You don't have to remember, was Atlanta on the Hulu movie shelf? Or was it on the HBO movie shelf? Or just kidding, it's actually on the Amazon movie shelf, right? Or maybe it was on one of those movie shelves, but then it moved over to this one and then moved over to this one. That's something that's kind of commonly happening now. And when you own a DVD or a VHS, it's on your shelf. You own the DVD and the VHS. So that's my opinion on basically using NFTs as like a capsule for, like a streaming content like that. The other way that, if we're kind of combining the esports trading card dynamic NFT example with streaming, then I think it gets even more interesting. Say you have a platform, in this case, you're maybe like a chess player, you have your own streaming platform. And I mean, chess basically is a sport. It's not an esport, it's a physical thing, but there is kind of like a linkage between the digital and the physical. And so that could easily be turned into a dynamic NFT as well. I'm not really going into like physical sports like baseball or football or anything, because the Chainlink team has kind of talked about that plenty enough, but that could easily be applied as well. And then the last one is music NFTs. My opinion on how NFTs could be applied to the music industry would work very much like so. Basically, you have music on an app. There's plenty of music streaming apps out there that would run through the Mechanized server, and that would release the control, the minting logic of the NFT. How this works actually in kind of like mass production would be people are listening to music, right, on their phones, on their desktop computers, at work, wherever, all over the world, all over different apps. All of that would run through a Mechanized server that would control the NFT minting logic. So if you almost think about it like people, like the Bitcoin hashing algorithm, right, is a whole bunch of nodes all around the world that are competing for mining Bitcoins. Same with kind of Ether, and so on and so on. This would basically be replacing the hashing algorithm with actually performing the app logic. In this case, listen to music through an app. And then, yeah, there would be a certain number of NFTs similar to only 21 million Bitcoin. And that would be set, dependent on the different groups, the bands, the artists, however, whichever teams want to use this and how they want to go about it. And that is my talk on NFTs as a new file format. Again, my name is Roosevelt Stenson, developer from the Midwest, and yeah, I got about 5 minutes left. Any questions on this at all? Anyone curious about anything?
My question is that so everyone want to access that file, for instance, that movie file, with the NFT authentication, right? And how this server work? I mean, like, you do gotta have like centralized server to authenticate this like NFT first, and then like send them the URL of these resources, or you have generally a decentralized mechanism to distribute this content?
You're talking the actual hosting of like the media file itself being distributed?
Yeah.
That could easily be done. So the actual like NFT, if you imagine that the NFT as being the equivalent of a DVD or a CD, right? The benefits from having it running on a blockchain are that you get an automated process of both transferring it, which is something you can do in the physical world. You can transfer a DVD to someone, you can hand a DVD to someone, but you can also trade it or resell it, which is something, right? I mean, I've purchased used DVDs and movies on Amazon before. I've purchased used video games off of Amazon, used video games from GameStop. So the blockchain would essentially automate that portion of those two parts of it. And then in terms of the actual media file, that could also be decentralized on a back end as well. There's plenty of cloud services out there, as well as people running their own servers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so basically you mean you put all the file content inside NFT?
Potentially in the future, when files are able to be kind of squished down that small of a size. But no, not currently. More so just using the NFT as a capsule for the website of, yeah.
Universal New York reporter. I just wanted to do that. Sorry, everybody. Could you elaborate on that, the mechanism one more time? Because I was listening, but I was really just trying to understand, like, how is that working versus the traditional way how NFTs are being used?
Sure. It's essentially creating an extension between the blockchain and kind of the front-end web app. Where currently the front end and Ethereum are basically directly connected. In this case, there is a mechanism in between the blockchain and the front end, using a combination of Chainlink oracles as well as my own proprietary server. And that would control, basically enforcing whatever logic is in the front end, creating kind of game logic for the process of minting an NFT. Does that kind of explain your question? Faster or slower? It's about the same as the minting process. Really no difference there in terms of actually like clicking the button and waiting for Ethereum to process the transaction. No real big difference there. It's more about just whatever the application logic is that a developer would want to use an NFT for, if that makes sense. So in my case with the game, it's however much time it takes to play through the jumper game, essentially. And then you get the NFT at the end, and then the NFT plugs back into the game as a form of DLC. Which for game developers out there, I'm rather big in like the game community as well. I'm big in like the game maker community and the other indie game community out there, really big on itch.io. And a lot of those indie game communities, they don't have things that other platforms like Steam have, where you can create in-game assets. You can use the Steam Marketplace and the Epic Marketplace to trade in-game assets. The blockchain would essentially do that process for them, where you could transfer and trade in-game objects. And yeah, sorry, did that answer your question? Okay.
You didn't really mention much about utility NFTs, where the NFT is giving someone access to a person or things like that. Is that because you think that that's not a proper use of NFTs that's going to stick around, or do you have thoughts on that?
Give access to a person?
So like there's a lot of NFTs out there where someone gets the NFT and then there's utility associated with it. So maybe you can have lunch with some celebrity once a year, or go to a conference, or be a part of a group. There's some benefit that's a real world benefit associated with it.
Right. I see that being big for the music industry because, if someone has an NFT that they purchased by actually listening to your album, and the only way they could get that NFT was by actually listening to your music, that person is a genuine fan of your work at that point. So, if I was a musician and I also went around and did, played at events and venues and whatnot, I would personally want to offer those people a VIP experience in some way, whether or not cheaper tickets, first come tickets, or even an event entirely just for NFT holders as tickets, essentially. Yeah, it's essentially a fan being able to literally be a bigger fan of someone's work.
Right. And the mechanics part that you were talking about, that is what you're
last question.
Have you considered like dynamic NFTs? Like, can you make it so that when you mint the NFT, it tracks how many times you've listened to a song and then it updates on some interval? Or like, for your example, I've played the game once, so it shows up once. If I've played the game 5 times, it shows up 5 times, and then when I input it again, it shows how many extra times I've played.
That would essentially be the equivalent to buying like an in-game asset or a DLC multiple times, for the video game example. In terms of actually tracking data on the NFT, I mean, so ideally, if someone were to use this technology to apply it to their business, apply it to their content, their band, their indie game studio, they would want it to essentially be as cheap as possible, right? You'd want to not spend as much gas as possible. You'd want everything to be as cheap as possible. That's how to run a business, right? And so being able to not necessarily push all the data onto the NFT every single time, increasing gas costs and so on and so on, you would essentially want to conservatively rather push the data onto the NFT when it's needed. So I could see it essentially being like, are you familiar with like the Nintendo Switch? The Nintendo Switch has the dock, right? You can put the Nintendo Switch on the dock, you can take it off the dock. The NFT could be encapsulated in the app where it is not costing data to update the NFT, but then if you want to essentially do a paid save as, right, then you could update the NFT, confirming that you are the #1 biggest fan of someone's music because you have listened to their music so many times. You have more NFTs from actually listening to that person's music, right? That would literally be the biggest fan in the world of someone's art. One more time?
So if you were Babe Ruth and you have your NFT that's Babe Ruth's NFT, and he got a new batting average, you want to update his specific. Does that make sense?
We can talk off stage. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah, thank you all for coming to listen to my talk.